Man, people really love Nvidia's new GPUs, huh? Wait, no, that's pizza. People really love pizza. Nvidia's 40 series GPUs, at least the more recent ones, not so much. It feels like each new release by Team Green this generation has been met with more salt than literally any ranked match in League. And out of all those GPUs, it's probably a safe bet to say that the RTX 4070 Ti has been catching the majority of hands. And around the time it released, it wasn't without reason. But now that the blackest of the black sheep has been on the shelves for like a couple of months, it's probably about time for a revisit, just to see whether it's finally worth picking up, or still sucks even more than Linus does at apologizing. And to help us answer that question is ASUS TUF Gaming RTX 4070 Ti, so let's get started. Right after I tell you about today's video sponsor, me. Yep, just me. If you want to support the channel, just keep watching the video. Or if you do decide to pick up any of the parts mentioned in this video, feel free to grab it all using my Amazon affiliate links in the video description. You get new stuff and help the channel while you're at it. Win-win. Alright, so the GPU formerly known as the 4080 12GB caught a lot of flack for, well, being called a 4080 and having a price tag to match, since spec-wise it really had no business being in the same conversation. Then, after everyone made a big stink about it, Nvidia unlaunched and rebranded the card as the 4070 Ti, dropped the price, and everyone lived happily ever after. Or at least that's what Nvidia was hoping for. In reality, everyone still hated it, and some hated it even more now that it was called the 4070 Ti. But I'm not here to harp on about Nvidia's most embarrassing moments. Gamers Nexus already does that, and no one's better at it than Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
The 4070 Ti is what it is, and I'm here to evaluate it for what it is. And what it is a pretty damn impressive GPU, with 7,680 CUDA cores, 60 next-gen RT, and 240 Tensor cores, blisteringly fast base and boost clock speeds, a TDP of 285 watts, and an almost generous 12 gigs of GDDR6X memory. Almost generous because while 12 gigs is more than enough for pretty much any modern game running at 4K plus right now, it does feel a bit on the low end compared to the competition. And it also includes support for new tech like DLSS 3.0, which we'll check out later. The TUF Gaming version builds on what Nvidia brought to the table by boosting clock speeds even more and ships with a pretty impressive cooler along with some neat extras. So let's take a good look at this thing. Even though we saw a handful of much flashier, sexier cards, including ASUS's own Strix line last generation, it was actually their TUF Gaming cards that stole the show for me. And it looks like that's a pretty strong possibility for this generation too. Design-wise, the TUF Gaming 4070 Ti has seen a pretty major overhaul over last gen's design, while still sticking with the same matte black and gray color scheme and military-inspired touches that helped set the TUF cards apart. While I'm not the biggest fan of said overhaul, with the card giving off a toy soldiers vibe, I know a lot of you are really going to appreciate the look of this thing. All of the little touches like embossed symbols, mission coordinates, somewhat subtle branding, minus the GeForce RTX on the side, which is massive, and the interesting geometry all work together pretty well. And I can definitely appreciate a sexy backplate when I see it. And for those like me who care, the card does feature RGB lighting. Well diffused and fully addressable RGB lighting, but just like last time, it's pretty subtle and feels a little unnecessary. Even though the card does have a toy-like aesthetic going on, at least in my opinion, it thankfully doesn't feel like one. The card has a bit of heft to it, but at the same time feels a lot lighter than you'd expect from such a chonky boy. And every single part of the die-cast shroud and metal backplate feels reassuringly solid. There is no part of this card that feels fragile or like flimsy, so it's living up to its name pretty well. Cooling-wise, I'm expecting a lot from this thing. It comes with a robust heatsink complete with an array of heat pipes, 3 beefed up fans, one of which spins in the opposite direction, which should help with cooling and noise, and a pretty generous cutout in the card's backplate to allow for some pass-through airflow. And before we move on, I need to give ASUS some quick props for including a dual BIOS switch on the card, and for including probably the most convenient little GPU support bracket thingy I've ever used, which also doubles as a screwdriver. Awesome little thing. Now, if we're going to see whether the 4070 Ti is finally worth picking up or not, we should probably see what it's got under the hood. So let's get to it. The test system I used was equipped with a Ryzen 9 7900X, a 32 gig kit of Gale's Evo 5 running at 6000 MHz CL32, Crucial's P5 Plus as our main drive, all slotted into MSI's Pro X670P and powered by Antec's signature 1000 watt power supply. Alright, let's kick things off at 1080p. Unigen superposition puts the 4070 Ti miles ahead of the rest of the stack, except when it comes to the RX 6900 XT. Which is something we see play out again in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, along with 4 of the other titles tested, where the AMD card either just nudges ahead of or outright knocks the 4070 Ti out. Thankfully for Nvidia's least favorite offspring, the 4070 Ti isn't out of the fight yet. Not even close, with the card managing to come out on top in 9 of the other titles tested. With the scores all tallied up, the 4070 Ti does walk out as the overall champ, beating the RTX 3070 by an impressive 28% and the 6900 XT by a far less impressive 2.6%. But hey, a win's a win. 1440p paints a relatively similar picture, with both of the big boys leaving the rest of the cards in the dust while they happily duke it out in their own little world of high frame rates. Interestingly, at this resolution, the 4070 Ti actually managed to beat the 6900 XT in a couple of games where it lost to the AMD card, and vice versa. This time around, the 4070 Ti came out on top in 8 of the 14 games tested, with the 6900 XT swooping up the rest. But even though it seems like the Ti lost some ground here, once the scores are averaged out, it actually improved on its lead over the 6900 XT, landing at 4.8% faster. And speaking of widening the gap, it also boosted its lead over the 3070. By a lot. 49% in fact. Clearly, that 4 extra gigs of VRAM is doing some pretty heavy lifting. Just like putting together another full batch of charts for 4K would be a lot of heavy lifting for me during editing, so I'm not going to do it. Especially since we're just seeing about the same results we've already seen. The 4070 Ti takes the dub in 8 out of the 14 games tested and lands at about 3.8% faster than the 6900 XT. Unfortunately, because ray tracing is actually pretty interesting, here are some more charts. In 3D Mark Sport Royal Benchmark, the 4070 Ti dominates the competition, including the now aging 3070, while the 6900 XT isn't left in the dust entirely. Moving on, in Shadow of the Tomb Raider and F122, the 4070 Ti continues this trend. But surprisingly, in Far Cry 6 and the Resident Evil 4 remake, it was actually the 6900 XT that came out on top. In Cyberpunk, the scales tip massively back in the 4070 Ti's favor, and that's even before we get into scaling. With the DLSS and the rest of the stack scaling tech running, we see a big jump in performance for all of the cards, including the Ti, which saw a 58% jump. Now remember earlier when I mentioned DLSS 3.0? Well, because you can only enable it on 40 series cards and because it cheats by creating and injecting more frames into the game, which also leads to a mismatch between frames and latency, comparing it to the rest of the stack doesn't make much sense. But I did test it and it definitely looks like a worthwhile bit of tech. It boosted frame rates in Cyberpunk and Miles Morales significantly, and I didn't notice any visual anomalies or noticeably higher input latency. Pretty cool stuff. Cool stuff like our TUF gaming card here, which maxed out at just 71 degrees C, 279 watts, and with fan power never going past 56%. And even at that fan speed, the card was barely audible outside the case, though at 100% you're absolutely going to hear it loud and clear, with fans maxing out at 3200 RPM. Clearly, the 4070 Ti is a pretty amazing gaming GPU, crushing frames at all resolutions with high settings and with even more frames up for grabs if you want to use the DLSS 3.0. And our TUF gaming version is definitely one to keep in mind. But performance has never really been the 4070 Ti's biggest problem. The problem has always been pricing and the whole 4080 12GB thing, but it's time we got over that. So I went ahead and looked at what pricing looks like now, many months later, and yeah, it's not looking great. The 4070 Ti was set to retail for $800, and that still seems to be the price of entry, while higher end cards are going for around $850 to $900+, with the TUF gaming card landing at $850, or around 22,000 Rand here in South Africa. This pricing puts the 4070 Ti at a minimum of 33% more expensive than last generation's 3070 Ti, which is a pretty tough pill to swallow. It's not like you're not getting any more bang for your buck, because you absolutely are, but it's still not a great look for Team Green. Especially not in a market where AMD's cards from this and last generation present some very real competition. As we saw on the charts, the 6900 XT is a pretty tough competitor, and right now you can find those cards selling for as low as $580. Or if you want something even closer to the 4070 Ti's performance, the 6950 XT looks very tasty indeed, starting at $630. And let's not forget the newer 7900 XT, which should just about outclass the 4070 Ti in most games and can be had for just under $800. Ouch. That being said, Nvidia's 4070 Ti still isn't a bad GPU and actually presents an okay value overall, especially when you factor in superior ray tracing performance, lower power draw, and support for technology like DLSS 3.0 and the frame gen feature that comes along with it. If all of that sounds good to you, you've got $800 burning a hole in your pocket, and the mere thought of switching to or sticking with AMD disgusts you, then the 4070 Ti is the GPU you've been waiting for. But you don't have to wait for this video to end, because it's over now. If you've made up your mind about buying any of the parts featured in this video, go for it using my Amazon affiliate links in the description down below to support the channel. Or just give me a like and get subscribed to see more of my face. And yeah, Catch you all in the next one. Cheers.